Hello and welcome to the RCN Foundation's Hints and Tips video for a stronger application. My name's Katie Slater and I'm the Grants Manager at the RCN Foundation.
Hello, my name's Sarah McGloin. I'm the Head of Grants and Impact at the RCN Foundation.
And my name's Michaela Lewis-Purvis and I am one of the external advisors for the Grants Committee at the RCN Foundation.
So I will just introduce a little bit about the RCN Foundation and who we are and what we do. We're an independent nursing charity. We're in our 12th year and we basically are a grant maker. So that means we provide grants to support nurses, midwives, healthcare support workers and students with anything to do with the profession. So we have three streams of grant making. The first one is for those nurses, midwives, healthcare support workers who are experiencing hardship. We have a benevolent service. We also fund nursing-led research projects. And thirdly, we provide education grants for nurses, healthcare support workers and students to either come into nursing or to undertake continual professional development activities, study days, attend conferences. I will hand over to Katie now, who will be able to start the presentation and talking through the initial bits of the application process.
Thank you. So as Sarah has mentioned, this video will cover how to complete the RCN Foundation's Education Grants application form. If we can just move on to the next slide. Thank you, Sarah. So we're going to explain who is eligible to apply, what courses you can apply for, and we're also going to give some advice on what makes a good application. So next slide, please. The RCN Foundation education grants open at various points throughout the year. To keep up to date with when the grants are opening, please follow the link on the PowerPoint to join our mailing list. You can also check the education grants page of the website for any open grants. One thing to watch out for is the eligible course and module dates, which change for each grant. So if your course or module falls outside of these dates, your application will not be considered. So please do make sure that you check these on the website before applying. So who can apply? Our grants support UK registered nurses and midwives, healthcare support workers working in the UK and nursing associates. Each grant programme will have a specific eligibility criteria, so please do make sure that you check this before you apply. It is also important to note that the Foundation supports non-members of the RCN as well, so you do not have to be a member of the RCN to apply. The course that you're applying for must be accredited and must be related to nursing or healthcare. You must be able to demonstrate within your application how this course or module will help you in your current role. Next slide, please. So we are now going to move on to the specific sections of the application form. The first part of the form will ask you to select which grant you're applying for, and you will then be asked to fill in some personal details, including your employer and your job title. You will then be asked to list your most recent and relevant qualifications. In the educational activity section, please ensure that you put the name of the module that you're applying for. If this is part of a longer course, you'll have the opportunity to put that course down below. In the summary of the activity, please make sure that this is clearly explained, including the aims and objectives of the course and any learning outcomes and how these will enhance your professional career. You'll also be asked to input the start and end date of the course. Please make sure that these dates are eligible for the grant that you are applying for. Next slide, please. So I will just talk briefly about the budget section of the form. So you'll be asked if you have asked your employer for funding, and if not, why not? And then you'll be asked for a budget breakdown where you can input the budget items, including course costs, any travel or other associated costs. Please ensure that the entire budget does not exceed the eligible amount of £1,600. If it does, your application will not be eligible. So we are now going to look at the longer application questions on the application form and how to answer these. So the first question is around professional goals and how the activity that you're undertaking will contribute to your career development. So I think we're just going to have a little conversation about this question. From my point of view, I just wanted to ask both Sarah and Michaela what the best way of answering this question could be. And also, does professional goals, does that refer to longer term professional goals or short term professional goals? And yeah, how can somebody answer that question well?
So I think if you break it down into two sections and you think about your professional goals at the time of applying for the funding and the course that you're wanting to undertake. So that could be a postgraduate module, postgraduate qualification. It could be a training course so that you're able to develop new skills, which can enhance patient care. So think about what you actually want from the educational activity at that moment, but also then think, where is your career going and how will this training help you achieve that goal? So for instance, this week I was talking a member of our alumni who received an education grant 10 years ago. She did it to support her to undertake her master's degree. What that has led to is her to become a senior lecturer in a university. And she said to me, without the grant, she wouldn't have been able to achieve her master's. And 10 years on, she wouldn't have become a senior lecturer. So think about it in the immediate, and then where long term do you see that education taking you? Michaela, have you got anything that you want to add?
I don't think there's anything else, actually. I think, yes, as you've illustrated, it's about looking ahead. So obviously, how is this grant going to help you in the present? But what's the projected impact, you say, 5 or 10 years down the line? So yeah.
Also, I think it's quite important to say that we are going to be coming back to people we have given grants to at maybe 3 years and 5 years post their grant to see what impact it has on their longer term career. So we're interested in the initial impact of the funding, but we want to see how that has been sustained throughout somebody's career. So we will be coming back to you at various periods after you've received a grant if you're successful. So moving on to the next slide.
So yeah, the next slide is the next question, which is about how the activity will improve the health and well-being of patients and all carers. So what are some of the most common mistakes that we get when answering this question, do you think?
So again, I can just jump in there and say, for instance, if it's something like the clinical assessment skills, a common mistake is how this activity will improve the health and well-being of patients and or carers. People will say, well, it will help because it will reduce the workload on the GPs and it will improve the waiting times in our practice. Whilst that's sort of an important aspect, it's not really thinking about how overall you undertaking training and education in clinical assessment skills and then top to toe physical assessment can enhance that individual patient's care. So you need to think about the overall picture, not just the service delivery impact. Michaela, have you got anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I was just to add about the overall impact and thinking about it in obviously you're looking at case by case basis in terms of your service users and your patients, but thinking about how you're impacting the system as a whole in terms of improving how patient care will look longer term.
I think as well another sort of module that people apply for, but they struggle with this question, is around the research methods and research studies modules. So you need to think about, why is it important that nurses understand how research is undertaken and what makes a good paper, So thinking about, if you're applying for that sort of module, thinking about okay, so I'm doing this course so that I can really understand what a good research paper looks like in a journal. And the research is, and the papers that you read are what you will base your practice on. They're the evidence base that you base your practice on. So by having the skills to be able to read and analyse a research paper means that you have the skills to be able to develop your evidence-based nursing or midwifery practice. So it's thinking around that sort of depth of answer that we want, rather than it improves the waiting times in the clinic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that will be very helpful for people looking at that question. Should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, absolutely. Press the button. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, so this is around sharing learning, around demonstrating a commitment to previous self-development. Oh, no, it is around sharing learning, apologies.
Yeah.
We often get people talking about how they're going to share their learning with their colleagues and talk about the course that they've applied for and that they're doing and how they found it. But we want to be looking at other ways as well, don't we? We don't want just those sort of conversations with colleagues or even sometimes presentations. We want to think a bit wider than that, and how can you share learning even outside of your direct team? What do you think about that?
Shall I?
Yeah, Michaela,
Yeah,
please do. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's lots of informal ways that you can share learning, obviously, but there's other easy ways that you can potentially share blog posts, do some internal composts, and even having, obviously sharing in your team, looking at having a specific agenda point where you are able to have just like a 5-minute slot where you present back a key piece of learning. So it doesn't have to be a whole presentation, but there's lots of ways that you can share learning as you're going along.
I think as well, a lot of the modules, you have to do an assessment and an assignment, and quite often that might be doing a poster presentation, for instance. So at the end of the course, you'll have a lovely poster, so you could put that up on the ward or in your department so people can see what you've been doing through that. You can do bedside teaching with students, which is really an effective way of sharing your knowledge. Or you can actually use your new knowledge and understanding to develop things like protocols, so that you're actually embedding the evidence base that you've learned through your study actually within clinical practice in a formalized way, and then that can be evaluated as you move on. So there's lots of ways that you can share your learning, and it isn't, as we say, just through doing a teaching session at lunchtime. It's because really in reality those don't happen. It's thinking about sort of the more organic ways in which you can share your learning and development.
Brilliant, that's great.
Can I ask though, if an individual is newly qualified and doesn't have that evidence yet, what would you advise in terms of how they could share?
Yeah, that is quite tricky. But what I would say is somebody who's just newly qualified has had 3 years of undergraduate teaching and learning. So they'll actually be really up to date with the latest evidence-based and contemporary nursing or midwifery practice. It's sometimes having the courage to be able to speak up and share that knowledge, which is quite tricky at times. So that really goes back to our 6 C's of nursing, and having the courage and the confidence to be able to share your knowledge and what you know, because as I say, you've just come out of your training and you've got you're oozing with the latest contemporary evidence. So what we'll say is don't ever feel that just because you're newly qualified you don't have anything to share. Actually, you have an awful lot to share, and you often make people who have been maybe registered for a bit longer think. So it's always a good thing. So never be too shy to speak up and talk about what you've learned on your undergraduate pathway.
Definitely push away that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely.
Brilliant. Okay, let's move on to the next question.
So this one's about the
This is
commitment.
yeah. Exactly. So yeah, this question asks how you've demonstrated your commitment to self-development so far in your career. So yeah, I think we would like to see you talking about other courses and training that you've undertaken, the reasons why you undertook that training, and what you learnt from it. We also would like to know how you may have funded that training. When you undertook it, was it something that you did in your own time, or did you reduce your hours in order to undertake that training, and those other things? Is there anything else that we would want to see in that question, do you think?
I mean, a lot of people answer this question with, I've funded courses in the past and I've done them in my own time, which does absolutely show a commitment. But I think you're right, Katie, it's understanding what professional development people have done in the past, and what sort of they've built their portfolio of learning and education since, you know, qualifying. So I think it's having a whole picture. So it's not, so we wouldn't just look at people who have funded themselves in the past before by any means. It's getting a whole feel for how committed they are to their own development as a professional. Does that make sense?
It does. So sort of looking at the overall journey, where you started, how you're the steps you're taking to get where you want to go. So yeah, that absolutely does make sense. That's really good.
It sort of links back to that professional goals thing at the beginning, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
I would just add that it's always easier when you use some specific examples to illustrate that journey.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So the next question, I think we're coming to the end of these questions. So yeah, challenges. So again, challenges that you might foresee in completing the activity, and how do you plan to address the challenges?
Okay, so we often find the answer to this is people will say finances and time. We recognise those already as challenges, so they're sort of like a given, really. We recognise that often you're having to do your training and education and professional development in your own time. Often you're having to fund it, and that's why you're coming to an organisation like the RCN Foundation, so to help you with that financial support. I think you need to think further about the challenges. So it's things like, it could be a master's level course that you've never studied at master's level before, you've studied at degree level, so it's actually going up that level. It could be an area where you're quite, of an area of practice where you're quite new, so you might have been registered for a long period of time, but you might have changed speciality, so your knowledge base isn't as strong as it might have been in other areas. So that could be a challenge. It could be that you haven't actually studied for a number of years. It could be that you're not particularly confident around using computers and accessing databases and searching for literature. So those are the sorts of challenges that we would like to see, rather than well, time and finance, because as I say, that's really a pretty much given. We understand that already. Michaela, have you got anything to add, do you think?
The only thing I would add is that when you detail the challenges, maybe give an example of how you might overcome, how you've addressed these challenges in the past. I know it's difficult, but that will help to see how your problem solving skills and how you mitigate against these issues.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, actually. So, and it's sort of showing that resilience, isn't it? Because it will demonstrate to us that you are committed, and also that you are aware that there are going to be curveballs thrown in, particularly, you know, if you're working full time, you've got a family. So it's sort of like having a plan to sort of think about what could happen and how you're going to overcome those. That's a really, really good tip. Thank you.
Brilliant. So I think we're now on to our last question, which is, how will you evaluate the effectiveness of your learning and development? So yeah, this can be quite a tricky question, I think, because obviously if you're doing a module or a course, the one way of evaluating whether it's successful or not is if you've passed. So a lot of the time people answer this question with oh, I will evaluate the effectiveness when I pass it, and that will be seen as a successful outcome. But we're looking for a little bit more than that, and looking for other ways that you can maybe evaluate what impact that course has had on your practice. So thinking a little bit further. So has your practice improved? What are the ways that you can measure whether that has improved? So Sarah, would you like to maybe expand a little bit on how people could maybe talk about those methods and use different methods for this?
Yes, so I mean, there's sort of tools that you can use in practice to evaluate the impact of the education that you've undertaken on your own clinical practice. Often, one of the best ways of evaluating effectiveness of learning and development is to receive feedback. So quite often practice assessment documents will ask for feedback from service users, carers, colleagues. So it's sort of continuing to build on that feedback. And certainly if you have students in your clinical setting and you're teaching them sort of on a one-to-one basis, quite often the feedback that they will give you is quite helpful. So it's thinking of a different range of ways. The other thing to say is at the end of your if you've been successful in a grant and at the end of your programme, we will ask you to complete an evaluation, a final report, which within that will ask how you will evaluate the effectiveness of your learning and development. It's really, really important that you take a bit of time to complete those reports, because we use those to then identify the impact of our grant making in relation to this, and that will help sort of generate future grant making. Because if we can demonstrate that it's had an impact, then it's a good thing to keep doing. So that final report is really, really important, and actually the final payment for your grant will be linked to that final report.
Brilliant, that's really useful. That's great. So I think that's the end of the questions that you'll find on the application form. We just have a short quote from somebody who received a grant from us, and as you can see, that the bursary has inspired me to keep improving. It has meant that I'm able to practice confidently and competently, which in turn gives me great job satisfaction. So that's really what we're trying to achieve when we're awarding our education grants. And we always appreciate feedback from successful candidates. So please do get in touch with us and let us know how the grant has helped you in your career and in your role, and we really do appreciate hearing from you. And I think if you have any questions for us, you can send us an email at the following email address, grants@rcnfoundation.org.uk, and we will respond to you. So please do get in touch if you have any further questions. And lastly, just to say thank you. And thank you to Michaela, and thank you to Sarah for the time and for answering all the questions that we get asked. It's been really helpful.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.